Time of prayer. To the Spirit of all life and love, as we gather together once again, we do so mindful of the joys and concerns expressed here today. As we listened, let us respond to those with love and kindness and with the outstretched hand of tolerance. May we take time and to look into our brothers' eyes and into our sisters' faces and know that we are deeply connected as a human family. It is in our diversity of experiences, culture, and backgrounds where the wondrous landscape of the human family is enriched and energized. Yes, we need not all think alike to love alike. But it is the love that holds us together. May we remember to celebrate that love today and every day. This we pray in the name of all the helpers of humanity, those living and those deceased. Amen. First reading this morning is an article I found, and it's entitled "Expect the Unexpected" by Roger von Ock. A leading business school did a study that showed that its graduates initially succeeded. But after about 10 years or so, they, the graduates, were overtaken by a more streetwise group. The reasons, according to the professor who ran the study, was, quote, "We taught them, the graduates, how to solve problems, not recognize opportunities." What's the difference between these two activities? The problem solver typically focuses on fixing what's broken or making something whole again. The opportunity seeker goes further, asking, how can I take advantage of the ambiguity in this situation by trying something new? Where might that lead? What do I see that I wasn't paying attention to before? In the same way that an end point can also be a beginning point, a problem can also be an opportunity for the creative thinker. Here ends our first reading. As Bruce mentioned, I began my Unitarian Universalist journey here in this very church. It was the first church I ever walked in, a Unitarian church I ever walked into. And to say that changed my life is pretty astounding. But I did start out right over there as a sign language interpreter. So I was a teacher of deaf children for about 25 some odd years. So I'd like to teach you some signs. If you are right-handed, you use your right hand. If you're left-handed, you use your left hand. So take up whichever hand you use as your dominant hand. You close it. Bring it close to you. To give. To give. And to receive. Right, to receive. To give and receive. Give and receive. That kind of motion creates an energy, I think. So with that in mind, the offering will now be taken for the continued work of this church. Our second reading this morning is by T.S. Eliot. He writes, "What we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started, and to know that place for the very first time." There are certain times in our life that are like markers. Times of the year that give us pause to affirm and acknowledge endings and beginnings in our lives. Times of the year that may be called, in the words of UU minister Robert Fulcrum, moments of liminality or threshold moments. The word liminality comes from the Latin root limen, meaning the center line of a doorway. Threshold moments are those markers to endings and beginnings. Memorial Day is one such marker. Memorial Day, originally called Decoration Day, is a day of remembrance for those who have died in service of the United States of America. There are over 24 cities and towns who claim to be the birthplace of Memorial Day. While Waterloo, New York was officially declared the birthplace by President Lyndon Johnson in May of 1996, it is difficult to prove conclusively the origins of the day. Regardless of its exact date or location, one thing is clear. Memorial Day was born out of the Civil War and a desire to honor our dead. On the first Decoration Day, General James Garfield made a speech at the Arlington National Cemetery, and 5,000 participants decorated the graves of over 20,000 Union and Confederate soldiers buried there. The first state to officially recognize the holiday was New York in 1873. By 1890, it was recognized by all the northern states. The South, however, refused to acknowledge that day, honoring their dead on separate days until after World War I, when the holiday changed from honoring all those who died in all wars. It is now observed in every state on the last Monday in May, with congressional passage of the National Holiday Act of 1971. This helped secure a 3-day federal holiday, though several southern states have additional separate days for honoring the Confederates who died. June 19th, Juneteenth in Texas, April 26th in Alabama, Florida and Georgia and Mississippi on May 10th, South Carolina, and June 3rd in Louisiana and Tennessee, which was Jefferson Davis's birthday. And I found a poem that I was researching for this sermon about the poppies. You always see the red poppies worn by veterans on this day. And there's a wonderful poem that was written in 1915, and it says, "We cherish too the poppy red that grows on fields where valor led. It seems to signal to the skies that blood of heroes never dies." So growing up, Memorial Day was such marker moment. There were local small-town parades with ceremonies honoring our fallen heroes, Boy Scouts marched, Cub Scouts marched, Little Leagues marched. It was the end to something, honoring those lives of the soldiers lost, and at the same time, it was the beginning of something, the summer season. So how do we handle these endings and beginnings in our lives when grief and joy kind of overlap in that experience? Do we take the time to pause and reflect on those liminal moments, those threshold moments in the doorway, or do we just step right through one door to the next, directly into the beginning of the next threshold moment, totally unaware and unmoved? Do we cross the limit, the center line, without affirmation or acknowledgement? Or is there time for reflection, rejuvenation, and renewal? Endings. Endings oftentimes feel a little bit more complicated and difficult, as in the purpose for this day, to honor the endings of so many young, brave lives. Although taking the poet Eliot's words to heart, to make an end is also to make a beginning. For those of us who live here, Memorial Day also begins an ending to some things that we hold dear. Perhaps the ending of our solitary way of life. The end of finding easy available parking. It's an end to short lines at the Stop and Shop. It's an end to easily cycling down Commercial Street. I remember when I first moved here in 1989 in the fall, and that first Memorial Day weekend, I just felt like my whole town was suddenly overtaken with so many people. It was an ending for certain, yet the beginning of the season. The end is where we start from. And yet to make this move mindfully from the ending to the beginning requires of us a willingness and an openness to affirm that ending. But what are the other endings in our lives? The ending to relationships, the ending to marriage, the ending of one's unemployment, the ending of one's ability to do certain tasks, to take care of themselves, the ending of life itself. How do we handle those highly stressful, complex, and often confusing endings in our lives? And truth be told, each of these endings is, of course, also a beginning. Yet one cannot move forwards in a new and healthy beginning without acknowledging, affirming, and yes, grieving the ending. My marriage is over. The relationship is finished. I can no longer take care of myself. My friend is dead. Such powerful and poignant endings requires of us, if not demands of us, a time for reflection, a time for sadness, and a time for grief. It's looking at these problems, like our morning read stated, as real opportunities. For me, the one tool that gives me the opportunity to hold up and honor an ending and acknowledge those myriad emotions surrounding it is the tool of ritual. Ritual, as von Ock reminds us, gives us pause in time and space to ask the question, what do I see now that I was not paying attention to before? In his book, From Beginning to End, The Rituals of Our Lives, Robert Fulghum writes, rituals are timed by the beats of the heart and not the ticks of the clock. They are the frames around the mirrors of the moment. I love that phrase. They are the frames around the mirror of the moment. Ritual behavior softens the phases of life when we are reminded how hard it is to be human. Ritual behavior enriches the phases of life when we are reminded how fine it is to be human. Rituals to me are creating and holding that sacred space. A sacred space leaves room for changes to occur and emotions to be expressed and experienced. Rituals can change from the simple lighting of a candle, as we do here every Sunday, to the ornate, a funeral mass, or a memorial service. Take, for example, the ritual created by 11-year-old Andrew Lorenz. Andrew had lost his father 2 years prior, and he wanted to have a ceremony at the lake to commemorate the second anniversary of his dad's death. He wanted to go, he told his mom, to watch the sunrise in silence at the shore of Lake Michigan, and he insisted to eat red cherry jello with bananas while they sat on the sand. Jello? At 6 in the morning, his mother asked credulously. Mom, red jello with bananas was Dad's favorite snack. We always made it together when I visited weekends. Andrew's mother was full of confusion over this request. She still harbored some anger and resentment over their divorce and had helped her son with his grieving over his dad's death, but had relatively ignored her own. Andrew, she said, it's supposed to be really cold tomorrow. Can't you think about your dad at home? Mom, please, Andrew pleaded. It will be okay. I just want to sit there on the sand and eat jello and think about Dad. We can dress warm and I'll take a blanket. Reluctantly, she agreed. Okay, but we have to get up at 5:15 if you want to get there while it's still dark. No problem, Mom. I'll set my alarm. The next morning, they set out, dressed in full winter gear. They arrived at Grant Park Beach in South Milwaukee, the only human beings in sight. As they sat in silence, at first the silence seemed uncomfortable and uneasy. Andrew's mom looked at her son and knew he was remembering and missing the dad he had loved so much in life. He was remembering the walks they had taken along the lake, about the plays and concerts his father had taken him to, about the trip to Florida he had taken with his dad just 2 months before he died. Concentrating on these warm and wonderful memories, his mother suddenly felt her heart begin to soften. Could it be that Andrew was onto something by having this ceremony, this ritual? Her mind began to flood with the happy earlier times of their marriage, the bike rides, teaching Andrew to ride, their many moves together, the day Andrew was born. Suddenly, all those unhappy times in the marriage faded away as a line of pink and steel blue clouds inched their way into the horizon. Even though it was still 20 minutes until the actual sunrise, the intensity of that sunlight from below the horizon was filling the beach with an eerie sense of almost day. Mom began to feel an eerie sense of almost peace. Andrew motioned that it was time to eat the Jell-O. As they sat together at dawn on the shore of Lake Michigan in near 0 degrees, remembering, reflecting. As the sun popped up on the horizon in a magnificent display of color, Andrew stood up. "It's okay to talk now," he said. Mom and son took a short walk on the shoreline and talked more about the man that was in both their lives. Andrew picked up pebbles and tossed them as far as he could throw them. "I love you, Dad," he shouted. And they went home. 11-year-old Andrew gave his mother a great gift. In his creation of a very simple ceremony, she told me, eating Jell-O at dawn on the beach, I was given the chance to grieve openly for the first time and to dwell on the fine memories of the man I once loved. Rituals are the tools we can use to propel us onward through these threshold moments. Rituals soften the phases of life, the endings, when we are reminded of how hard it is to be human. Beginnings. As we are reminded this morning, the end point can also be a beginning point, just as a problem can be an opportunity. So what do those places of the new beginnings in our lives, places where we said a healthy and holy farewell to what was and walked through a new door, a new threshold to a new beginning? How do we handle those new beginnings, these new opportunities? To me, a healthy beginning is a direct reflection of a healthy and holy ending. Beginnings are also those markers through a rite of passage. Imagine sitting around the dinner table, following a good meal, and the topic turns to new beginnings in one's life. Those first-time events. I remember the first time and the conversation is off and running. The stories may grow into who can top this, but the phrase, "I'll never forget the first time I," will certainly lead into insights and introspections on the formal and undoubtedly the informal beginnings of our lives. Again, ritual is a tool we can use, but to me do not use often enough to acknowledge those beginnings. Who here had their passing of their driver's test celebrate with any kind of ceremony? Anybody? You did? Bless you. And yet surely this is a major marker, a threshold moment for any youth. It marks the beginning of independence, of responsibility and accountability. Did any women here have their first menstrual cycle celebrated as a rite of passage? You did? Congratulations, sir. It's one in every crowd. God bless you. Any women have their menstrual cycle? No? And truly, this is a huge beginning for a young woman, a threshold moment. And what runs parallel to this for young boys? Do we acknowledge their first athletic supporter? Their first nocturnal emission? Can you imagine going to your dad, "Hey, guess what happened to me last night?" No. Of course we don't acknowledge those beginnings in the life of our young people, yet truly these are holy beginnings. These are threshold moments in their lives. This weekend marks the beginning of the summer season. A former minister here, Allison Hyder, a few years back created a ritual for all the drag performers to show off their talents and in this space, and then to bless them with the hopes for a successful season. Unfortunately, she could only do it on Sunday nights, which is when the drag people performed, so it never really caught on. But the attempt was there to celebrate the beginning of the season. Last week on this day, I was officially installed as the settled minister in the Unitarian Universalist Society of Martha's Vineyard. I love that word, installed. It's like they set you up and plug you in, and of course then the next Sunday I left, but that's okay. It is the closest we get to high church rituals as Unitarian Universalists. There is much pomp and circumstance as members, friends, and family gather as minister and congregation read a covenant they created together. It places my relationship with the congregation on a permanent and steady journey until each party decides otherwise. The coming-of-age programs in many UU churches are designed to make up for those unacknowledged beginnings, to hold up and honor the endings of childhood and the new holy beginnings of young adulthood. As we affirm these in a ritual ceremony, yes, you have passed through a threshold moment. We welcome you to the next phase of your life. And at the opposite end of that, in summer, many UU churches, I believe here too, participate in a water ceremony, a ritual to mark the beginning of the church year and the ending of summer. This water ceremony is a ritual for many UUs to mark time, marking the ending of summer worship, if indeed the church has them and does not close, but that's another sermon altogether. UU minister Max Kutz writes, "When love is felt or fear is known, when holidays and holy days and such times come, when anniversaries arrive by calendar or consciousness, when seasons come as seasons do, old and new, but somehow new, when lives are born or people die, when something sacred sensed in soil or sky, mark the time. Mark the time. Respond with thought or prayer or smile or grief. Let nothing slip between the fingers of your mind. For all of these are holy things we will not and cannot find again." Yes, in marking time, the time we place a framework around the mirror of the moment. Truly, however, it is difficult sometimes to separate the beginnings from the endings, because the end is where we start from. With the ending of a marriage comes the beginning of a new life. The ending of one job marks the opportunity for the beginning of another, or perhaps the beginning of retirement. But still in this economy, many are heading into the beginning of new careers. The time gap between that ending and beginning of new employment and new careers often, especially in today's economy, takes some time. At times, it's like this connection to community for support is so imperative. So, my friends, as we mark this time of Memorial Day weekend, may we be mindful of the various endings and beginnings in our lives. As we pass through the doorway of endings and beginnings to endings and beginnings, may we pause with ritual and honor to offer blessings and gratitude for that ceaseless flow of endless time. What we call a beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. This is the end of my sermon. Let us go forth and begin to live with hope and possibility. Blessed be, and amen. Let's take a few